All right. Welcome back to the Relationships Made Simple for Men podcast with me, Bryce Bauer. Today I'm here with Dr. Lee Baucom. Is that how you say it?
That's correct.
Okay. And there's a lot I could say about you. You're a marriage and family therapist, also a doctor, also a thrivologist, which I want to ask you about. And then you've written 9 books.
I mean, it all depends on how you count them. I've got seven stacked up here beside me, and then I've got a couple online. So yeah, we're in that vicinity.
Okay, yeah. So prolific writer. Yeah, and I'm stoked to talk with you today. When I looked you up, I do get some emails from people wanting to be interviewed on this podcast, and I usually ignore them, but I watched just a snippet of one of the episodes you did, and I was really impressed. I liked what you had to say. So I'm excited to learn from you today and ask you some questions.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's start with the pause button marriage. I heard you talk about that in the other podcast, but can you tell our listeners what that is and yeah, just break it down for us?
Yeah, so before I jump in there, let me
Okay.
just say I was trained as a therapist. I'm a PhD level trained therapist, and then I switched over and started doing coaching. And we might get into to why that is because therapy often is that first stop for people who are in marriage problems, and there's some real problems to that. So we can talk about that, but let's start with where the problem kind of
Okay.
gets
Yeah.
started. So as I've watched couples, I watch them, spend all of this energy getting into the relationship, building their energy, falling or the relationship and falling in love and all of their investment in that to the point that they go, okay, let's make this, a lifetime thing. And they go through that service, very short service. I remember like that was all it took for us to, to be married. And there we were off into the world. And what happens after that is where we hit the pause button. I'm not saying it's right after the wedding. I'm not even saying it's right after the honeymoon. I'm not even saying it's in the first few months. But at some point, most couples get to this place where they go, okay, we've got to do these other things. We've got to parent or job stuff or, aging parents or something that's got our attention. So we'll get back to our relationship, after that. We'll get back to it at
Uh-huh.
this point in the future. And that's when they hit the pause button. And for most of those times, it's almost a subconscious decision for both of them to see it that way. Like we'll just put this in suspended animation and we'll do these things that we need to do. And then we'll get back to us. So that's the pause button. Um, here's the problem. There are two possibilities for any relationship. They can either be growing and expanding or shrinking and dying. That's the only choice. No suspended animation.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And so couples start going through the motions without the connection. And as they go through those motions without connection, they start feeling the disconnection in themselves. And they are aware of the fact that they're not getting the connection they want. They usually aren't aware that they have also been participating in that pause button. So the disconnection is kind of the roots of all of this, and starts the process that everybody else looks at the symptoms that they point to these things. This is the problem, communication. This is the problem, whatever, affairs, whatever, and all of that roots back to the disconnection. So the pause button is the start of the process.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, that language. And I know in working with couples, they often come in to see us when, yeah, they're feeling disconnected. They're fighting about things, but really
Mhm.
it seems like it's more about, I'm not feeling connected to you anymore. And it hasn't felt that way in a while. And maybe it's been slow, maybe it's been fast. I'm curious if you came to this conclusion about the pause button from personal experience or professional experience or a bit of both.
Really from professional experience, but I got it. I had enough viewpoints of what happens when a marriage gets into trouble that we've managed to avoid that for ourselves. I've been married for coming on 38 years, and we didn't hit the pause button, but there were times when we had to figure out how to make that work. We both were in grad school at the same time. We had kids, starting careers. all of that came along, and we had to make sure we were on the same page. There were some moments when I realized that we weren't playing as a team together, and we had to step back and say, how do we want to do this? But the watching couples is where I realized how often that happens. So that disconnection then plays out. One of my kind of complaints about watching therapy is how often therapy kind of defaulted to seeing the problem as communication.
Uh-huh.
And that communication, it really is a symptom. The bad communication is a symptom of the disconnection.
Sure. Uh-huh.
So when people would come in and say, we need communication skills, teach us communication skills because that's where we're stuck. I would sit there and listen to them for, 35, 40 minutes and go, you've understood each other perfectly. I've understood everything you've said, the words, the way
Yeah.
you said it, everything is there. This is not a communication problem because communication is just a way of relaying information. And so the question is what you're relaying. If you're relaying disconnection, that's hurtful. If you're
Uh-huh.
relaying connection, that's helpful. And so as I watched that, I realized that we had to step back a little bit further of what happened to get us to that disconnection point.
I have a question popping up, and it's a generalization, but do you find that women are more likely to notice that the pause button has been pressed, or is it the more anxious one? Or like, can you kind of tell when a couple comes in who's getting it more than the other, or is it sometimes equal?
So I think one of the things I have noticed is sometimes the woman is willing to say, "Hey, this isn't okay." And men are often willing to drift along for a lot longer. It's not that they're not in pain. They
Uh-huh.
may not be able to isolate what that's about. But that's true both sides. They just know something's wrong. And so I often hear from one or the other, something is wrong. And so your question of, is it the anxious person? Um, Being disconnected brings out our anxiety. And so, you almost have this built-in thing that once somebody becomes aware of the disconnection of the pain of that, the anxiety gets injected into the system. And so then you start watching how people start responding to that and ways that are not connecting, that are more about pulling at the other person, trying to force the issue. So I do see, and again, another one of my concerns about therapy is I would watch people drag a spouse into therapy.
Right.
A lot of times that was a woman, not always. But dragging a spouse into therapy is a great shortcut to causing deeper problems.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can see that. Which also, I mean, it leads me to my other question about one of your books, which is Saving Your Marriage If Only You Want to.
Hmm.
So I was wondering, how do you work with someone when one person seems to want to be there more than the other, like in coaching or therapy?
Yeah, so one of my requirements for working with a couple is that both of them are ready to move forward. That's not ready to stay married, ready to pledge that, but ready to move forward and work on things. Um, so to back up on why I think it's a problem to try to drag a spouse to therapy, there's this concept, psychological reactance, which basically says that if we feel, even if we know something would be good for us, if we feel like we are being pushed into it, we'll resist.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh. Yeah.
you already have somebody who's like, I don't want to be there, who's now feeling forced into it and being told they need to work on things. So now they're even more resistant. And they generally spend their time, having watched this over and over, they'll spend their time trying to convince both the therapist and the spouse that this is not working, that this is too far gone, that there's nothing that can be done, as opposed to saying, okay, who can I work with? If one person is wanting to change things, how can they work on those changes in themselves? So that's kind of started creating ways for people to make shifts in the relationship, knowing that if one part of a shift happens, it creates the shift throughout the relationship.
Yeah.
If you see the relationship as a dance, and this is a lot of times people say, well, doesn't it take two to tango, right? And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, you're already tangoing. I mean, that's what happened
Yeah.
when you you got together. It's just you're not doing it well now, and the dance
Right.
steps aren't. a connective dance. So one person can choose to change how they're dancing it, and that many times will change the other. Now, not always, because sometimes the other person is dancing so far away at that point. They left the scene. They're on another dance floor. But one person can start adding connection, and this is why that matters. We humans are deeply rooted for connection, where other other creatures in the world have a limited way of connecting. Warm-blooded creatures, mostly it's physical connection, but humans, we have three levels of connection we can connect on, and that's because of how wired we are for that connection. I mean, I don't think there's another creature that it takes at least 18 years to get the baby ready to go take care of itself.
Yeah.
Except for in humans, we do it in modeling and learning. And so that deep connection is already in there. So one person can start working to reconnect, and that's naturally very appealing to the person, even if they don't recognize it, they can't identify what's going on. It feels warmer, it feels more connected, and that draws you back in.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I have a saying that it takes two people to keep a pattern going and only one to change it. And I think
Hmm.
that's similar to what you're
Same
saying.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see
And that's
how,
it's interesting that because that's either way, right?
uh-huh,
Two people can get a good pattern going.
sure.
One person can start it. But two people can also devolve a pattern in a bad direction, and one person can start to reverse that.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like you're also saying that by waiting for someone to change in a way, it's like a disempowering move. And I see some people get stuck here subconsciously, like, well, I can't really do anything until they do XYZ. But sounds like you're trying to teach people how to get their power back, make changes, and then, yeah, see how their partner responds to it.
Yeah, so it's really reclaiming the power that's been there. So get the
Uh-huh.
power back is really going, oh, wait, I can do things differently. So here is where a lot of problems happen, I think, is a lot of people just don't know what to do. Like they don't have that set. There's a psychologist back in the 80s, early 90s who created the hope formula. And the hope formula has three elements. And I remember at the beginning of my career, they would tell me you got to help them have hope, and I'm like, how do you help somebody have hope? Well,
Uh-huh.
you just got to do it, right? And I was like, there's got to be some way of helping build that. Well, Charles Snyder said there are three parts to it. One piece of it is knowing where you want to get to. There are a lot of people who aren't even sure what that would look like. Like, what would a healthy, loving relationship even look like? Because they haven't seen that. So, if they get some clarification on that, that's important. But a lot of people at least kind of have a good concept of where they want to get to. So, that's the first piece. I'm going to skip the second piece and go to the third piece. The third piece is having the willingness to do it. That's the agency we just talked about. That's why I wanted to bring it up. The agency has to be there. Am I willing to do these things to figure it out? And for some people, they're like, no, I'm not. At which point they're going to have to redefine where they want to get to. That whatever they said they wanted to get to, if you're not willing to go there, if I decide I want to go to the beach, but I'm not willing to drive or ride or fly or whatever, it doesn't matter what I want to do.
Sure.
It's
Uh-huh.
irrelevant. So it's that willingness, that agency to do it, which leaves only that middle segment of knowing how to get there, knowing how to do it. That's another big deficit for people. I have often talked about the fact that our culture does a really, really bad job of preparing people to get married. Here is the most important relationship in an adult life, and we don't give it as much attention as learning to drive. So, here they are walking in with trying to figure out how to drive it as they're putting it all together. And so I've often said it's like on the job training with no one to correct you along the way. You're just
Right.
doing the damage and building that into how you're doing the job. And so that continuation means that if unless you step back and say, I don't really know how to do this, I'm going to go look for different programs or resources to help me learn how to do that, you're left without that middle piece. Even if you know where you want to go and you're willing to do it, that piece is critical.
Right. Right. Yeah. Me and my wife were actually talking. yesterday about this because we both went through public school and how we didn't have one class on communication or relationships. I mean, communication like public speaking, but there was
Yeah,
not
right.
one class on relationships. So we got into relationships as teens and, had no guidance whatsoever. We watched our parents, which we had pretty good parents, but yeah, most people don't get any education. They're just, yeah, expected to figure it out.
Yeah. So I've watched people and they'll come from broken families and they're like, yeah, I never saw a good relationship. And then I'll have people come in and they're like, I saw a good relationship, but I don't know what was, this the secret sauce, right? You don't know what made that work really well because that's between those two. And it's not like there's a whole lot of giving that guidance. A lot of places will do a couple of premarital sessions or a weekend event or something like that. But honestly, it's hard to get that through to people when they're at that point. They've already decided to get married and they think they've already beaten the odds. That was always kind of my thing when I was doing premarital counseling. And when I was in practice, there were 7 locations in town, 7 places of faith that if you were going to get married there, you were in my office for 3 sessions.
Uh-huh.
And, I would sit there and say, okay, the statistics here. I mean, I could walk down the street and ask, what are the chances of divorce? And there people are going to say, well, it's mostly 50-50. Not quite that, but it's
Uh-huh.
close enough that we can call it
Yeah.
that. And so I would say, how do you beat that? I mean, you're getting ready to go get married knowing that the odds are 50-50, just a coin toss. And they would say to the person, we already have beat that because we have the real love.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's not the fake stuff that, people thought
Yeah.
they were in love. We really have it.
Uh-huh.
And that's the mistake, thinking that love is going to carry them through.
Uh-huh.
So the love is momentum, which is why a lot of times people don't realize they've hit the pause button for a while. They coast for a while through the momentum they built up. But momentum dies out after a while. If you're not continuing to add energy to it, it dies off. And they don't recognize that going in. They think they've already got what it takes to get to the finish line.
Yeah. I was wondering if you find that that tracks with the age of children. Like, I've heard that the lowest levels of marriage satisfaction are when children are the youngest because they require the most attention, probably. And then as kids grow up, get older, they're more autonomous, they leave the house. Now there's like more space and time for the parents to connect. Do you find like that tracks with the age of children?
Sometimes as the kids get older, there are actually more opportunities for parents to realize how disconnected they are. So we have different break points. When kids go to college is a big break point for a lot of marriages because they're suddenly like, we have no buffer, right? We're here. But if you back up, a lot of times couples keep pacing out when they're going to get back to us based on the kids' point, like when we get them out of diapers, when we get them into school, when we get them out of school, into college, out of college, and it goes on, because you start building these habits of disconnection rather than building in the habits of connection. And so it's only a matter of time before that kind of filters down and you go, wow, we are so far apart. And so those nodal moments when the kids are old enough to take care of themselves, that is one point. Um, Now there is an early one when everybody is so no sleep and so stressed out. There are a lot of marriages that really struggle to get through that and don't. But then it's these points when, the kids get to a certain level that it's risky again because suddenly you have some energy when they can feed themselves and take care of themselves, a little more energy. Wait, who's this person? When they go to school, when they go get out of the house, all of those points are nodal events. I remember talking to lots of people who said, I was so surprised I left for college, my parents divorced. I didn't know there was a problem. And
Mhm.
because it's a silent problem. You
Yeah.
don't see the disconnection they're feeling. It just lingers in the background.
So for anyone who's listening to this, who has children that are young, let's say 0 to 7 or something, what do you think is a reasonable expectation as far as connection goes? Like how often should they be doing therapy or doing date nights or making time to connect? What's like the bare minimum there?
Yeah, so great question. So let me first attack some pieces of it.
Okay.
Okay. If you are disconnected, if you realize you've hit the pause button, one of the mistakes people make is they go for more intense connection than the relationship can manage.
Okay.
Date night can be that. There's nothing wrong with date night itself unless it's injected at a point of extreme disconnection. And you're like, I have to get ready and do, and what are we going to talk about? And
Uh-huh.
so that feels like an obligation. Therapy can be the same. Marriage intensive is another one I hear people talk about. We're going to go away for the weekend and they're going to fix this. I'm like, you guys are so disconnected that the possibility of that going well is low. Or we'll do a romantic getaway when the relationship just can't manage that. So what is the minimum depends on where they are in the process. If they, and this is the kind of the straw man thing that I hear from people. The argument is you can't expect us to spend the same amount of time we did back then when we were dating now. And I'm like,
Sure.
I never said that.
Yeah.
But if you've got the momentum going in and you keep it going, um, I've had some pretty sucky cars in the past when I was
Mhm.
young, and I pushed a few. And I happen to know that the hardest push is at the beginning. Once you get it rolling, it doesn't take nearly as much to keep it rolling, but you got to get it rolling. And it's the same with a relationship. If you're at a standstill, getting it to move a little bit is the hard part, but it doesn't always take that much energy to keep it moving. Um, let's go back to those three levels of connection because I think this might help give some targets for people.
Okay.
So I mentioned the first one is physical connection. That's what other creatures like my dog likes to be up against me. That's what she understands. I'm up against you, you're up against me. We like each other. So physical connection is loving touch. Generally, when I say that, people go, "Oh, you mean sex?" And my response is no, but yes, that is a style of that, but that's not it. Any loving touch. So the hugs, the kisses, the back rubs, the foot rubs, the passing each other and patting each other, any physical touch like that that's loving says, I want to be near you. I'm connected with you. That's the physical connection, a very basic level. That's the one that's kind of easy for people to kind of think about because they remember falling in love and the chemistry that was there, right? But sometimes that falls away and it becomes a peck or pat or not much. But that's a physical way of connecting that people lose track of. The second one is emotional connection. Emotional connection is both verbal and nonverbal. So as we're sitting there having this conversation, you're nodding right now. You kind of we're in agreement, right? We've got this connection. I go, oh, okay, I can keep on going on this
Yeah,
line.
yeah, yeah. I've
And
actually
so,
practiced that with my wife. I used to be more still face. I just
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
realize it, and she's very emotive. So it's been one of my practices to like be engaged with my eyes and face. So
let
yeah,
her see
great.
that, right?
Yeah,
That and that's
exactly.
and a lot of times that is what is read as you're not interested, you're not listening, you're not paying attention, I'm boring you, right? And that all that leads to you don't want to be around me. So the nonverbal is very powerful. So is the verbal though. And so we carry that on these two levels. And there are two primary pieces to this. Do we get each other? Like, does my wife laugh at my jokes? I don't know why, but yeah. And so I feel like she gets me. And, I can respond to her when she brings up something, I can respond to that. And she knows I get her. So there's that level. And then there's the level of do we support each other? Do we feel supported is the bigger piece. Do I feel gotten and do I feel supported? And do I create that feeling for my spouse? So the support is do we celebrate, those good moments and also commiserate in the bad moments? And do we connect on what's going on in our daily life? Not like, here's my calendar, but what did that mean to me? What was big about that meeting? What was important about that? What was scary about that? That's the emotional connection. Then the third level is spiritual connection. And when I say that, people go, "Oh, religion." I'm like, "No, but yeah, that is one piece of that because our religious beliefs tell us something about our values. And the values is so the spiritual connection is our deepest self being revealed to somebody else,
Mhm.
that deepest part of ourselves that what do I hope for? What do I dream about? What do I find to be most important? What scares me? All of those pieces. The interesting thing to me, oh, by the way, that is verbal. I mean, there's no other way of transferring that information
Uh-huh.
than sharing it.
Uh-huh.
The interesting thing is when I was listening to all those couples coming in for their premarital session, almost to a person, they would tell me about this conversation they had that was often started late in the evening and went until early in the morning, where they just told each other things they haven't told other people. The family they came from, the difficulties, the joys, the whatever, the values they took from that, their hopes and dreams for the future, kind of where they wanted, what they wanted in life. And the person could say, oh, I could be a part of that journey. And they're connecting on a spiritual level. But because they don't notice how important that is, they often tuck that away and never get back to that. And yet, our spiritual, our core self, undergoes some transformations through life. More things are revealed, more things are clarified, and even what we find to be most important can vary depending on where we are in life, what point we are. And so, even though I might not lose a value, it might change how I present that value, for instance. For some people, their values actually do change. They have something that comes along and it completely changes their values. And if suddenly you've got a couple who thinks they're on the same page with their values and they suddenly realize they are not, that's even a bigger rift between them.
Right.
So that's the piece that often just disappears for couples. They don't even realize that that's a thing they could talk about.
Yeah. I realize I'm taking you on some tangents at times when you're like you're saying so much stuff that makes sense. So feel free to stay on point if you feel like you want to finish something. But I was wondering if you have an example of a common value change that you see with couples. You said that happens sometimes.
Yeah, it does. So for some people, religion was important and becomes unimportant, or wasn't important and becomes important. Um, Politics change our viewpoints, and especially these days, there are some huge vacillations that have happened in the last few years where a couple thought that they saw things alike, and they suddenly are aware that on these issues they change. But just to go back to that, they change, but many times even there people's core values, like what they really want for the world and for themselves, sometimes is similar. They just have a very different perspective on that. So I always warn people to be clear whether a value they're talking about is a difference in values or a difference in perspective on how they're viewing it. But that's a part of a conversation between two. I think there are some times when there are some value shifts that are insurmountable. It came to me years ago when I was talking with a couple, and they told me they were there because they wanted to save their marriage, and they were like, "We don't know if this can continue." I'm like, "Okay, well, why?" And she said, "Well, I think we might have a difference in value." Now, I've seen enough times where people thought that, but it wasn't that. So I went, "Okay, tell me what you mean." And she said, "Well, I'm all about monogamy. When I got married, this was my one person." And I said, okay, and you? And he said, I'm ready to bring on a new wife. That's There's an incompatibility that you cannot cross in that, right? That's
Right,
a
right.
value
Yeah.
problem. But there are some more subtle ones. So back to the couples who were getting ready to get married, I would often ask, have you talked about kids? Like when, how many, assuming you have much control over that, and there's a lot that you can't, what would you want to have happen? Sometimes they had not had a conversation about that. And when they started having the conversation, they realized that they were not on the same page at all. And that's another core value piece that you can't you can't find a way around that. If one's going, I absolutely want kids, and the other's going, I absolutely do not want kids. It's an incompatibility in their value structure of what life would be about. So that would be an example that is probably more common. Sometimes that changes midstream too. Like
Yeah.
people thought that they wanted kids, and then one goes, I'm not interested anymore. That's a bigger issue that is difficult to unwind if both of them are really frozen in that position.
Yeah, and it brings up another question because we've worked with maybe five couples that have opened their marriage prior to seeing us. And we've never seen it go well. So I guess and it seems like this is becoming more common. There's been
Mhm.
some shows that have talked about it. And I'm wondering what your take is on what the value really is there for people that want to open, and if you've seen it work, why does it work if it does? Yeah,
So,
all
so,
that.
I often give the disclaimer that when I'm working with couples, I'm seeing people who are in trouble. So I am not able to say that all open marriages are doomed. I will say that many times I've watched people open their marriages for problems in the marriage, not because it was a values alignment. And so that sets up a difficult thing. When I hear people talk about that, and to a person that's been unsuccessful, when I hear them talk about it, part of what got them there is that they then set up a bunch of guidelines to keep their relationship safe. The problem is their relationship was already shaky. It was already in trouble. And so the rules ended up being violated, almost always the reason that I saw them. Um, so I think that a lot of times people are looking for a way that's culturally at least accepted by some pieces of culture to treat the disconnection, not knowing that what they're not addressing is the actual disconnection.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're saying you haven't really seen it work. Um, and if it does work, maybe you'd need really clear boundaries and a lot of communication.
So I haven't seen it,
Okay.
and I haven't heard much. But again, the people who would be successful at it would not be talking with me. So
Okay.
there's a self-selected piece to it. I just haven't seen it work. And I think the times when I have heard about it, there really was already an issue. It's almost like they were trying to find a culturally acceptable way to have an affair, and that did it for them, but it also didn't help the core problems in their relationship.
Right. Right. Yeah, I do think about this and I'm like, I feel like my wife and I really give 100% to our relationship. And, there can still be times when we struggle. And ultimately, I think we both want each of us to be there for each other when we really need it. And that
Mm.
requires like 100% of our time and attention, or at least availability to do that. So splitting that up, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me how that could work.
I haven't seen it work well, but again, that's a selective group. But you brought up an interesting piece there, because you challenge what sometimes when I talk about people moving to being a we, that is a transformation that has to happen in a marriage for it to be sustainable. Like we are in this together. We are a
Yeah.
unity, a united front. We're this new entity that we created. And by the way, that's what the law says. I mean, you now have this thing, the family you've created. But being a we, a lot of times people go, oh, so you want me to just give up me for that? No.
Uh-huh.
So if you're showing up, your term was we were giving 100% to this, right? When you're showing up, I start drawing on analogies for this, like being on a team. So let's go with pickleball, right? And when I step
Yeah.
out on a pickleball court, I've got a partner and I'm watching my partner practice and I'm assuming my partner is watching me and I'm going, okay, I need to shore up this or I need to watch for this or I need to be aware of this so I can play my best so they can play their best. I'm not there to go, well, you've got a crappy backhand.
Uh-huh.
And that's not my job, right? And
Uh-huh.
and to not play against them, like I'm going to go snag every hit I can get. That's not it either. I'm there for us to try our best to win. That's what I mean by being a we. Like we're going to be the best team. We're going to show up the best way we can, play the best way we can, supporting each other as we go through this. And that's not about losing yourself. It's showing up your best self. Now, I also will say that showing up your best self doesn't mean you're 100% your best every day. You're the best you've got that day. And there are some days when we have less. And that's one of the little things that I think is just mentally thinking about this. You don't have to do it, but it's not a bad thing to do. Brene Brown says that when she and her husband get home, they announce what their score is for the day. They're
Hmm.
like,
Yep.
I mean, I got 30. And
Yeah.
the other can go like, no problem, I got 70. Combine that together, we got 100.
Yeah, I love that.
Their scoring method is if you're below 100, you need to hunker down. If they're like, I got 30, I got 30. Okay, let's order a pizza and watch a movie. That's it. No big discussions, no big nothing. If it exceeds 100, great. But you got to get to 100. And that's just a way of thinking. I am not always going to be at my best. Can we back each other up when we are not at our best and not say, well, you're not pulling your weight? That in the short term, you're not pulling your weight is a judgment. In the long term, there is a place to say, hey, I feel like I'm putting all of this in and I feel like I'm not, being met with that. How do you feel about that? Not you need to change, but how do you feel about that? Because a lot of times, have you seen the studies where they have couples estimate how much they carry of the kind of the family load?
I've seen something like that. Yeah.
It always exceeds 100,
Yeah.
which
Doesn't
is an
surprise me.
impossibility. Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
both people think that they are putting in more than the other is aware of. And that's the danger is not seeing what the other person's doing. And that's a conversation. I feel like I'm doing this. What do you see in that? That's a different thing than saying you're not carrying your weight.
How do you assess that as a coach? Like if a couple comes in and you can see that one person is probably carrying more of the emotional load, um, and the other person's not seeing it, how do you confront that? How do you work with that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of pieces to that. The first thing is emotional load is one element of the family. And I've seen plenty of situations where one is carrying more of the emotional load, the other is carrying more of the practical or financial
Sure.
or some other piece of the load. And they actually, when they realize what they're doing, are accepting of that. My concern is when one person is having to do all of the emotional um, carrying of the family, then somebody is getting to check out, and so that is a time when I can start talking to them about what would it mean to be in this together emotionally. That's an element, and what would it be to be in it together in these other areas too is a fair conversation. Now, a lot of times couples fall into patterns without realizing they're falling into patterns. They're making assumptions and they have expectations that they're not talking about. So when we're talking about that on the job training and they're getting into the bad patterns, they don't know it because somehow they're making the dance kind of functional, not healthy, but functional.
Yep.
And having an outside perspective is helpful for that to be able to say, wow, you're really carrying this and you're not, is a fair place for a coach to be for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, with the traditional family system where one parent works outside the home, let's say the other parent is at home taking care of the kids. Um, how do you see that? How do you help couples balance that out more? Let's say it is really more like 90-10, 90-10. Uh, yeah, how do you work with that? Can they function in that place, or do you think it needs to be more balanced?
Well, so I would leave the individual, how do we want to structure this to them? But I want them to have had a conversation of how do we want to structure it instead of just, I'm going to go do this and you're going to do that built into my mind. So when couples have actually created some clarity around that, that can be functional for one to say, you got this arena. But just to back up, let's say that the split is, I'm going to work, you're staying home. That doesn't mean the emotional load is split the same way. The
Uh-huh.
person who's going to work can still come back into the house and be emotionally supportive of the kids and emotionally supportive of a spouse. Those are separate things. Those are functions. I'm going to functionally deal with the house. I'm going to functionally deal with the job, as opposed to you take care of all emotional stuff in the house, including my emotions, because I'm going to go do this. So I think that it's important to kind of differentiate the functional piece versus the connection piece. That's we're still back to that. Even if one is going out and doing the work, when they come home, can they find a way of connecting and building that connection?
Hmm. I found that I've had to sometimes just check my own bias here because I live in a conservative state where the traditional family system is the norm. And it seems like some people are conditioned to only desire what they saw, and
Mm.
they don't even realize that there's a different option available. That, for instance, the husband could step up more in the emotional department because men aren't very emotional. They don't talk about their feelings, and so they kind of live within that story. So it can be tricky to introduce some new ideas when it can feel threatening, scary. They don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, and so there is the question of opportunity for a man to say, I don't have to do that. You might get to do that, right? You might get to engage in, for instance, the kids' lives to be a part of their life emotionally. You get to have a more connected marriage. Because when you say, I don't do that emotional stuff, that's the home stuff, you're eliminating a lot of the connection that can be there. I mean,
Right.
midpoint on those connections that was emotional, it also carries over to the spiritual. So now you're saying those two areas, I'm not sure I want to be a part of. So that doesn't leave, but the physical, that's generally not a good balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I realized I haven't asked all the questions I wrote down because I've just been rolling with what you've been saying. Is it okay if I go to one of these?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So you are the world's first thrivologist, and I was wondering what that is. I feel like I want to be one.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell me
You can be
how,
one.
but okay. Well,
Yeah. So years ago, I read a book, and the it was a toss away. The author said there ought to be a field of thrivology, studying how to thrive, because we don't have that. And I'm like, well, let's start that. And so I started doing a lot of research in, I started with resilience. And resilience is always about if something bad happens, how do you get back to kind of ground level? I'm like, there's got to be more than just ground level. Because how do we learn? We learn from those struggles, and that takes us above ground level. So I was looking at that. And so I went, okay, if I'm going to do that, I'm just going to, if there's a thriveology, if you're doing that research, you're a thrivologist. And so that I just claim to be the world's first because I coined the term.
uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Um, I'm also curious about your transition from therapy to coaching. And I don't know if you knew this, but my wife did the same thing. She was trained as a marriage and family therapist, had a private practice for 10 years. And then around the time we met 10 years ago, she transitioned to coaching, partly because of how she could market differently. But also, she just realized much of what she was doing was more, I think, like what you're saying, was the thriving and not just trying to get people up to like, um, yeah, just surviving or
Mm.
base level. So she made that transition. But I'm curious for you, what made you make that change?
So I was doing my training back in the 90s, late 80s into the 90s. And as I was working on my training, I went into a program that I got some training in individual therapy and marriage and family therapy, two very distinct
Hmm.
theoretical understandings. And I really like the systems view of marriage and family therapy. So I understand the individual world, and there's a lot of positive things to be said for individual therapy. Marriage therapy, however, research-wise, shows that it is not overly effective. So um, about 50% of couples who go to marriage therapy still end up divorced. That's suspiciously similar to the
Yeah,
general population.
yeah,
Only 10 to 15%, depending on what research you're looking at, but only about 10 to 15% say it even helped at all. So if you go to a doctor and the doctor says, I think you need to have this procedure, got to tell you that 50% of the people who have this procedure are going to die, and only 10 to 15% are going to find it helps. Are you going to sign up for that procedure? Because I would not. I'd be looking
right.
elsewhere, right?
Uh-huh.
And so the reason I started doing the research is because I was getting frustrated watching my colleagues and myself going through supervision and watching the effects of even my supervisors, the very trained people, working with couples and going, this isn't working. I mean, it's clearly not working, and it's not the therapists who are not working. We're doing our thing, and I realized the model is a problem. And so I was literally working on my dissertation, typing it in the corner of our very small house at that point. My wife is on the couch behind me, and I read an article about It's one of the first articles on this new profession of coaching. And I read the article and I turned to my wife and I said, "This is how I do my work."
Uh-huh.
And she said, "You're finishing your PhD. What are you going to do about that?" And so what I did was I finished my PhD, finished my dissertation, was working in a clinical setting, but I also then went and got 3 years of training as a coach and used that as I brought that in. And eventually you go, okay, it's not comfortable anymore to say I'm a therapist, but I'm really doing coaching. I was
Uh-huh.
also working with people around the world. That's a problem for therapy.
Sure.
And so it was time to leave. Uh, it's not that I think that all marriage therapists are bad, but honestly, a lot of people who are doing marital therapy are not trained as marital therapists.
Right. Right.
They just happen to have them as clients,
Right.
and that's a systemic problem. Like they don't have the viewpoint, the perspective of a marriage therapist because they weren't trained in that systems approach. The second thing and so then that leads to them often siding with the client and not meaning to, but siding with the client. And they're almost always pulled onto the side of the person who says, I don't think there's a way for this to work. So I have that problem. Also, therapists are expected to be neutral, and I think people, when they are working on a marriage, need somebody who is pro relationship, pro
Yep.
marriage. Um, so I've already said what happens if the doctor says you need this procedure. But if I go in and my arm is like this really weird angle and the doctor says, well, that's broken. I mean, did you want to do something about that? Or I
Yeah.
would want them to be going, hey, let's make that work.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's get functional.
Uh-huh.
That's what I mean by being pro relationship. If there's nothing that can be done for the relationship, great. But let's start with an assumption that we're going to do what somebody does when they're coming in for marital therapy and work on it.
Hmm.
So that was another piece. The other piece that concerned me was therapists are not supposed to share advice. And couples who are lost, back to that hope equation, don't have a roadmap for how to do it.
Sure. Yeah.
And so the therapist is trying to be reflective, and what they're needing is direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I did Terry Real's relational life therapy training, and he's a proponent of taking sides when appropriate. And that was kind of mind blowing because yeah, some of the trainings I had done prior to that with individual coaching had been more like, yeah, it's you're not taking sides, you're asking people what they think, and I think that was falling short a lot of
Hmm.
times.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's what you're saying, but I can see how even taking sides can be a way to be pro relationship when you see one person that's maybe more pro relationship than their partner, and that needs to be pointed out, even if it, yeah, maybe frustrates or upsets the other person.
Yeah, so I've often said to people, I'm on the side of your relationship.
Yeah.
And that may mean that I agree with one of you or the other, but I'm on the side of your relationship. If that requires me to confront one of you, that's what you're going to get. That doesn't mean I'm against you. I am
Uh-huh.
for your relationship. That's my client. My client is the relationship coming in the room.
Uh-huh. Is your family pretty stoked that you know about relationships and you're a professional in this area? Is this a
So
good
my
thing in your
my
life?
wife is also a trained therapist
Okay, cool.
and still does a lot of work with individuals. My father was a minister, and so he had some training in counseling. My mother was a school psychologist, so it
Wow.
kind of goes through
Okay.
the family system already.
Uh-huh. Yeah. What about your kids? I mean, I guess I'm wondering how do you have so much good advice you could give your kids on relationships. How do you balance that with being their dad?
Yeah, carefully.
Yeah.
I don't look to give advice when it's not requested, and that is true. I mean, it's the same thing when I'm talking with friends. I don't put on my therapist hat. I don't put on my coach hat. I'm a friend hat. If somebody says, "Hey, I need to ask you a question," sure, I'm happy to talk about that. And the same with my kids. Whenever they've had an issue with life, I've given them books, not just my books, but I've given them books. They have my books just because I'm like, hey, this is cool. I've got a book out
Yeah.
and other books and said, if you want to talk about that, that's great. If you don't want to read it, that's fine too. But I think there are times to wait for people to be open, just period in life. They're not always going to be open for what they might even need to hear. And so I often have people contact me and they're like, I don't know if I need a coach. And my response is, everybody needs a coach.
Sure.
Do you want a coach? I mean, everybody can use an outside perspective. That need is in us. We are in a world where we don't have enough mentors and leadership. And so, yeah, I need a coach. Everybody needs a coach. Do you want one? That's the real question.
Yeah. I want to make sure there's time for you to talk about ways people can work with you and just everything that you offer. I was curious if you and your wife did any work together, if you work online, if you do in person, if you do retreats. It sounds like you travel around the world, or at least you did.
So I actually work with people remotely around the
Okay.
world, and so I don't travel to see people with rare exceptions. But my wife's work is individual work, now remote, but she's working as a therapist, which has its own licensure issues and that kind of thing. I'm doing coaching, so generally I'm not having to worry about where somebody is located as opposed to her. We talk a lot about what are we doing and what how best to work with something because she's got a wealth of
Yeah.
knowledge and I do. So we can compare notes some, but that's the level. I work with people by phone predominantly. I think that kind of shortcuts a lot of the headaches of technology.
Sure. So
But
phone without video, or do you do FaceTime too?
I don't do a lot of video because it's always gotten in the way. There's always that I
Sure.
can watch somebody and they're staring at their selfie. I'm like, we don't need to have that. Let's just I've been doing this now. Let's see, I started in a mid 90s, early 90s to see people. It's a long time ago. I mean, last century,
Uh-huh.
right? And so
Uh-huh.
I don't need to see to hear what's going on. And a lot of the coaching is directional, like, you're telling me what's going on. Let's talk about what you do from here. Let's put together a plan and create that. My programs are designed for even if one person wants to work on it, that they can
Okay.
do that themselves. So I've got programs that are they self administer. I have done the books, obviously, are a piece of that. I've got some coaches that also assist me in the coaching, just because of the number of people coming through. Right now, we started the Unpause app back in November,
Uh-huh.
which is the Unpause app is because people hit the pause button. And a lot of times I realized I have the Save the Marriage system for people who are like, this is crashing and burning, and I need immediate first aid to work on that. So that's the Save the Marriage system. But there are a lot of people who are just like, we are chronically disconnected, we're unhappy, and I see where this is going to go if I don't do something now. That's when they will need the Save the Marriage system. The
Uh-huh.
Unpause app is designed to help people walk through the process of unpausing, hitting that unpause button instead, and starting to reconnect. What I like about an app is we're trying to change people's relational habits, and apps can remind you of that in ways that books can't, that online
Uh-huh.
programs can't. It's in your pocket going, hey, there's training today, there's activity today. Have you done that today? And sure, you can ignore it. I mean, plenty of people ignore the stands on their watches and every other command, but
Uh-huh.
it's there for you if you really want to change the habits. And so we're building out ways for people to get into new habits. If you've got into a habit of disconnection, you have to have systems to help you create the habits of connection in order
Sure.
to get out of that.
Okay. So you have an app, and then your program, is that like a self-directed online course, or is that in
It is.
conjunction with phone with calls as well, or is
Well, it can be.
okay.
I generally like people, since I have kind of a certain perspective on what this is about. A lot of times people will call me and say, I just want to coach with you right now. And I'm like, okay, but this will save you some money. Just get the
Sure.
course and go through it, because you may at the end of the course go, this guy's a nut. I don't agree with anything he says. And we've already established that. Or you go through it and go, that I really do need coaching, but now I understand the underpinnings of this. So that now we can get into something much more quickly. So
Okay.
the The program generally is the starting point for people who are trying to save their marriage. I have coaches who will often reach out and say, are you getting started okay? Just to make sure we've got that going, and we've got other programs to support them. The Unpause app is self-directed. It does have, we trained it on my thinking process. And so you can ask it questions. And so far, I tested it forever trying to get it to answer the way I wouldn't, and it won't. It answers based on all of the knowledge that I put into it.
Oh, nice. So it's like a GPT. Is that how you made it through?
It has a AI behind it, yeah.
Okay.
And so we gave it all of my books and a lot of my podcast, and like then I started asking questions, and it pulls out my stuff and gives them a response. So if it, 10 at night, 2 in the morning, whatever, they're like,
Yeah.
gosh, I need help with this. And it gives them my thoughts.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I was building out my own GPT and I was surprised at how quickly it started to pick up on things, just uploading documents and stuff. And
Yeah.
we've even used it's not perfect, but my wife and I have used Chat GPT occasionally just to plug in like, hey, going through this issue or personal thing. And I've been surprised at how helpful it's been. But yeah, to have like a professional's tone of voice and just a little more color to it, I can see
So
that.
one of the things that I warn people about with using AI is that AI does a really good job of mirroring you in ways that you don't see.
Yep.
And so I've had people come to me and they're like, my marriage is tanking, and I asked AI and I used that information. I'm like that, but all it was doing was mirroring you, right?
Right.
You miss
Right.
that fact. It's a very high level of that, but it becomes a very sycophantic kind of response to you,
Sure.
where you think that it's saying giving you solid advice when all it's really doing is telling you what you want to hear. And
Right. Right.
so if you've got a more neutral one and you're using it every now and then, that's different than if you have, it's picked up on it. And so that whole piece is one of my concerns. So that's why we built it with my knowledge, not
Yeah.
their feelings.
Yeah, that's a good point. You have to be careful with it because yeah, there's a confirmation bias there. And it does seem it seems like it always thinks it's right, just the way that it talks. So the confidence piece there, I mean, I can see how it could lead people
The
down the
confidence
wrong road.
is misleading because it's the confidence of a mirror that makes you look good. And
Uh-huh.
then you feel
Yeah.
good about, oh, look at me. And it's not telling you all the stuff that you need to change because it's so tied into what you're already telling it.
Right, right. I'm glad we covered that because I've heard more and more clients talk about using ChatGPT and even you framing that reminds me to remind them that yeah, it might just be mirroring what you're saying and kind of proving your own points and not actually helping you sometimes.
Well, let me enlarge it because I've actually written about this and talked about this. There are two other pieces that I think are dangerous. So we already have the piece where it starts reflecting back to us. That's one of them. The second thing that I think is particularly dangerous is that people start falling into the trap of relating to their chat because
Uh-huh.
it's always available.
Uh-huh.
And it's easier to talk with that than a spouse because you don't have to worry about, your spouse has opinions and feelings and all of that stuff. And so it becomes very attractive. And I've had people who really were developing emotional attachments to that should have been part of their true relationship, the real
Right.
person.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's another one. The other is I often watched people, and I hear this from people where they are getting the chat to write their texts and to help them build their arguments,
Uh-huh.
how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's not relational, right? You're giving it pieces that aren't you, and you're getting the opinion on how to have the argument to win, not to improve things. And so just using it that way often is even more boosting the disconnection than people think.
Oh, that's interesting. So is this an area that it sounds like this has been a new area of study, has been AI and relationships?
I think it's pretty unavoidable these days
Yeah.
for where AI is going. And so I started thinking seriously about what does this mean for how people get help. AI does lots of great stuff. I mean, obviously it codes better and faster than people, but there are limits.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to get help with your relationship, we just named three limits very clearly that it reflects back to you what you want to hear. It is always available and therefore very attractive because maybe I don't want to have this conversation with a spouse, but I need to have the conversation with a spouse. So I
Sure.
take the easy answer, and that it builds up um, a relating back that is not based in you. It's based in the chat, and when it goes into what I often hear from people of I want to know how to argue back. You're now arguing to win, not to solve an
Right.
underlying issue.
Right. Yeah, you don't build any resiliency in staying in the messiness of a real conversation with all the feelings and managing your activation and
You shortcut and
yeah.
you've got an answer without the self-regulation.
Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted me to ask you?
You know, you did a really good job of bringing out lots of stuff. And I think we talked about these high points of connecting being so important. Connection is the lifeblood of a relationship. So we nailed that pretty well. The three levels of that, which gives us targets. Like a lot of times people are like, okay, so how do I do it? And I'm like, wherever you are in those three levels, a little bit more. That's you want to be looking at where you are because it's individual. I can't say, here's how you do it physically because I don't know where somebody is physically or emotionally or spiritually, but a little bit more is where you start building in that connection. So we talked about that. A big piece for me is the importance of not staying paused. That's typical for people to do that. And people don't know they're doing it. But once you realize it, then the question is how you unpause and how you pivot to being a team, to seeing your partner as we're in this together. Let's be our best in that. Those are the pieces that I think we covered, but just to put them in a nutshell.
Okay. Nice. I was just thinking you're such a wealth of knowledge. You kind of remind me of talking to a GPT. You have a lot of one, two, threes, you know?
If I start glitching or something, you'll know
Yeah, no,
that
I think
just
you're a real
created it.
person, but yeah, you're just a wealth of knowledge, man. And even just your summary there, I thought that was beautiful. So yeah, I really appreciate our talk today.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for being vulnerable enough to reach out. I don't know if it felt vulnerable to reach out to me and not know me and spend an hour with me here.
No, it's been a joy. I mean,
Yeah.
you've done a great job, made it very comfortable.
Okay. Well, thanks. That feels good. And if you're ever out in Utah and St. George, I'd love to play some pickleball with
Let's
you too.
play.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I'll be out to rally anytime soon, but I'll be here.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
come to East Coast, I'm here.
Okay. That sounds good. We'll end this here. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I'll be out again with another episode next week.